I told my ex-in-laws that their cheating daughter isn't my problem anymore. Let's start from the beginning. Jess and I were together for 7 years, married for 2. We had decided to wait on having kids until we were financially stable. After our second anniversary, we felt ready to start trying for a baby. I thought everything was fine until it wasn't. As we began our journey toward parenthood, I noticed Jess acting differently. She was glued to her phone, often out late, claiming it was work or meeting friends. I trusted her, so I ignored the growing distance between us. One night, she came home late, and when I asked where she had been, she avoided my gaze and offered a flimsy excuse about work drinks. That was my first red flag, but I chose to dismiss it, believing it was just a phase. But Jess continued to withdraw, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Out of desperation, one night I checked her phone, hoping for answers. What I found shattered me. Jess had been texting a guy named Derek and meeting him behind my back. My heart dropped. How could the woman I loved betray me? When she got home, I confronted her, showing her the messages. She broke down in tears, mumbling apologies and claiming it wasn't meant to happen. That moment hit me hard. How do you accidentally cheat? I told her I wanted a divorce. She begged for forgiveness, suggesting couples therapy, but I refused to sit through therapy with someone who had betrayed me. I filed for divorce, and thankfully, our prenup made the process smoother. Jess kept trying to change my mind, calling and reaching out to my friends to convince them to persuade me to reconcile. It was pathetic. I stood firm, I was done. In the aftermath, I was grateful for the prenup, which protected my finances. While it didn't lessen the heartache, at least I didn't lose everything along with my trust. That's how my marriage ended, and the messy aftermath began. Little did I know, I'd be grappling with the emotional fallout for years to come. 3 years later, I severed all ties with Jess. I didn't want closure, I just wanted to move on. I changed my number, relocated, and went off the grid. I didn't miss Jess herself, but I missed the life I thought we were building together. During those years, I started therapy. I grew up in a family that didn't talk about emotions, so when Jess cheated, it felt like all my bottled-up feelings exploded at once. My therapist helped me see that my struggles were tied to unresolved issues from my past, and therapy became one of the best decisions I ever made. Fast forward 3 years. I was making progress, focusing on my career, spending time with friends, and even dating again. Then one day, while grocery shopping, I unexpectedly ran into Jess's parents. I hadn't seen or heard from them since the divorce, and it caught me off guard. Susan, her mom, approached me with tears in her eyes. She informed me that Jess had been in a serious car accident and was in the hospital. I felt blank, unsure how to react. I didn't feel happy about her being hurt, but I didn't feel any sympathy either. Then Susan asked me to visit Jess in the hospital, saying it would mean a lot to her. I looked Susan in the eye and said, "Jess isn't my problem anymore." She was visibly shocked, and Tom, her dad, finally spoke up. He mentioned that everyone makes mistakes and suggested it would be good for both me and Jess to find peace. That's when I lost it. I snapped that Jess could rot in that hospital bed for all I cared. I reminded them that she was the one who cheated, not me. I owed her nothing. I walked away, leaving them standing there in the grocery store, shocked. Later that night, my dad called. Jess's parents had reached out to complain about my coldness. My dad sided with them, saying I should have visited Jess to be the bigger person. My sister agreed, but thankfully, my mom backed me up, saying I didn't owe Jess anything. This sparked a huge family argument. Some friends weighed in, too. Some thought I was being too harsh, while others believed I was justified. I didn't care what anyone thought. I wasn't about to feel guilty for not rushing to see my cheating ex-wife. Eventually, the dust settled, and I realized how complex emotions can be. One moment, you feel anger and betrayal. The next, a twinge of empathy. But in that case, my empathy didn't extend to Jess. I held firm to my decision to leave the past behind. The conversation with her parents made me reflect on how far I'd come. I wasn't her savior, and I refused to be guilted into pretending otherwise. I had spent years processing my feelings, and I wasn't about to let anyone manipulate me into caring about someone who had hurt me so deeply. As I moved forward, I focused on rebuilding my life. I knew I had the strength to overcome the past and build a future free of Jess's shadow. It was a long road, but I was determined to find happiness again on my own terms. Emma fell silent for a moment, and I thought maybe I had finally gotten through to her. But then she hit me with, "It's not the same. You were married, you shared a life together." That was it for me. I told her I didn't want to hear about Jess anymore. Emma was clearly unhappy with my response, but eventually dropped the subject. We tried discussing other things, work, family, but the tension lingered. After she left, I was consumed by a mix of anger and confusion. Why was everyone fixated on my visits to Jess? I owed her nothing. A couple of days later, I discovered why. I received a call from my dad, insisting we needed to talk. This was unusual for him. He never showed up unannounced, so I sensed something was off. When he arrived, he immediately launched into a tirade about how I disrespected Jess's parents and how I should have at least shown decency by visiting her in the hospital. I stood there, dumbfounded. What the hell was happening? Why was everyone acting like I was the bad guy? I attempted to explain my perspective, but my dad refused to listen. He insisted that family was important and that I should have done the right thing. That's when it clicked. It wasn't just about Jess, it was about my dad's past. During his rant, he let slip that my mom had cheated on him when they were first married. I was taken aback. I had no idea. Suddenly, everything made sense. He was projecting his own experiences onto me. I stared at him, struggling to process what I had just learned. My dad, the family man, had faced something similar and chose to stay with her. That's when I lost it. I told him, "I'm not you. I'm not going to forgive Jess just because you forgave Mom." He fell silent and replied, "You don't understand. It's not that simple." But here's the truth. It was that simple for me. Jess cheated. I wouldn't forgive her. End of story. We went back and forth until he stormed out. We didn't part on good terms, and I was left feeling conflicted. On one hand, I understood my dad's perspective. He had endured his own heartbreak, and he thought I should forgive Jess as he forgave my mom. But on the other hand, I wasn't him. I wouldn't allow her betrayal to slide just because he had made peace with his situation. The rest of that week was awkward. My dad didn't call, and I didn't reach out either. We both needed space, which left me feeling strange. A few days later, Emma texted me again, urging me to reach out to Dad and make things right. But I wasn't ready. I needed to process everything first. It's not every day you learn your mom cheated and that your dad stayed with her for decades without your knowledge. So here I am. My family's a mess. Jess is still in the hospital, and I'm just trying to figure out how to deal with everything. All I know for sure is that I'm not going back to that life. Jess can remain in the past while I keep moving forward, regardless of what my family thinks. Update 2. After the argument with my dad, we didn't talk for a few weeks, which was unusual. Emma kept texting me, trying to play peacemaker, but I just wasn't ready. One night, while I was watching TV, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I picked it up, and guess who it was? Jess. She texted, "Can we talk?" Seriously? After 3 years of no contact, she just pops back into my life? At first, I didn't respond, but curiosity got the better of me, and I texted back, "What do you want?" It didn't take long for her to reply, saying she wanted to clear the air, that she had been doing a lot of thinking since the accident and needed to apologize properly. I wasn't buying it. She had 3 years to think about it, and suddenly she wanted to chat because she was lying in a hospital bed. After some back and forth, I reluctantly agreed to meet her. When I arrived at the hospital, the tension was palpable. I walked into the room, and there she was, looking frail. I had seen her like this before when we were married, but seeing her now felt surreal. "Hey," she said softly, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sympathy. Almost. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. She wasted no time expressing her remorse for everything. I listened, but sympathy was not on my agenda. She was trying to play the victim, and I wasn't falling for it. When she mentioned she had thought about reaching out sooner, but was scared of my reaction, I couldn't help but chuckle. "You mean scared of facing the consequences of what you did?" I asked. She claimed to have changed and insisted she was a different person now. I asked if she truly believed I would take her back after everything. She looked shocked and admitted she didn't expect that, but she wanted to clear her conscience. Listening to her plead, her case was exhausting. I told her plainly that I wasn't interested in her apologies or excuses. I had moved on, and she was part of my past I didn't want to revisit. When she began to cry, it irritated me further. Eventually, I stood up to leave. She begged me to stay, claiming she needed me to understand how much she regretted her actions. I told her I didn't need to understand anything and walked out. When I got home, I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. I was glad I had stood my ground, but I was frustrated by the emotional toll of the encounter. I texted Emma to let her know I met with Jess, but I didn't dive into details. The following days were chaotic. Jess's parents kept reaching out, but I ignored them. Emma continued to encourage me to talk to my dad, saying he was worried about me, but I stood firm. Then, just when I thought I had enough drama, my mom called. She wanted to meet, claiming she was concerned about how I was handling everything. I almost laughed at the irony. When we met, she brought up Jess and suggested I reconsider my stance. I sighed heavily, feeling like I was trapped in an endless cycle. "Mom, we've been over this. I'm not forgiving her. I don't want to discuss her anymore." She looked at me, a mixture of concern and frustration in her eyes. "But you don't understand what it's like to let go of someone you love. I had to deal with your father's betrayal. It's not easy." I felt my frustration boiling over. "But you chose to forgive him. I don't have to forgive Jess. She cheated on me. I'm not responsible for her feelings." I took a deep breath and stood my ground, understanding where she was coming from. I knew what I needed to do. Keep moving forward. Jess was a chapter closed in my life, and I had my own future to focus on. Things were quiet for a few days, and I thought I had finally gotten through to Jess. But just when I thought it was over, I got a call from my mom. You have to understand, my mom doesn't usually call unless something serious is going on. We're not the type of family that checks in daily, so when I saw her name on my screen, I knew something was up. When I answered, she got right to it. "We need to talk about Jess." I felt exhausted just hearing that. No matter how hard I tried to leave that chapter of my life behind, everyone seemed determined to drag me back into it. It turned out Jess had reached out to my mom. She must have figured that if she couldn't reach me directly, she'd go through my family. In true Jess fashion, she managed to manipulate my mom into believing she was the victim here. My mom talked about how much Jess had been through since the accident, how she'd changed, and how she was genuinely sorry and just wanted to talk to me. I couldn't believe it. I told my mom flat out that I didn't care how much Jess had changed. It didn't erase what she had done to me. But my mom wouldn't drop it. She kept saying things like, "People can grow. It wouldn't hurt you to hear her side." I was getting more and more frustrated. It felt like no one in my family understood how deeply Jess's betrayal had affected me. They acted like it was a small thing I should just get over, but it was anything but small. My whole life had been turned upside down because of her. Eventually, I told my mom I didn't want to talk about Jess anymore. I wasn't going to visit her, talk to her, or let her back into my life. I thought that would be the end of it. But then my mom hit me with something that stopped me in my tracks. Jess was dying. Yes, that's what she said. Apparently, Jess's injuries from the accident were worse than I'd realized. She was still in the hospital, and according to my mom, the doctors didn't think she had much time left. That's why Jess was so desperate to talk to me. She wanted to make things right before it was too late. I don't know how to describe what I felt in that moment. It wasn't sadness, but it wasn't relief either. It was this heavy mix of emotions I wasn't ready to confront. On one hand, part of me thought, well, that's karma. On the other hand, it felt strange knowing that someone who had once been a huge part of my life was about to die, and here I was, refusing to even acknowledge her existence. I didn't know what to say to my mom. I just sat there, letting it sink in, my mind racing as I tried to process everything. After a long pause, I finally said, "I'll think about it." I didn't make any promises, but I didn't shut it down completely either. I needed time to figure things out. So here I am, stuck in this confusing place of not knowing what to do. Do I visit Jess and give her the closure she's apparently looking for? Or do I stand firm and keep her out of my life, even if she doesn't have much time left? It's a lot to think about, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Part of me feels like it would be the right thing to give her a chance to apologize, but another part can't shake the anger and betrayal. We'll see what happens next. Update 3. Alright, here's what went down. After that whole mess, I spent a few days sitting with my thoughts, trying to figure out what to do. I kept thinking about my mom's words about Jess dying and how this might be my last chance to talk to her. It weighed on me, but not in the way you'd expect. It wasn't that I suddenly felt bad for her or anything. It's hard to explain. I was just stuck in my own head, going back and forth on whether I should give her the closure she was asking for. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to go for a drive. It's something I do when I'm stressed, just drive aimlessly until my brain quiets down. Before I knew it, I found myself parked in front of the hospital where Jess was staying. I hadn't even planned on going there, it just sort of happened. Sitting in my car, I stared at the entrance, debating whether to go in or just leave. Part of me wanted to get it over with, while another part asked why the hell I was even there. I sat there for probably an hour, maybe more, thinking about all the crap Jess put me through, every lie, every time she went behind my back, all the begging during the divorce for my forgiveness. And now she wanted me to show up at her bedside, as if none of that had happened. It didn't feel right. But still, there I was, in the parking lot of the hospital at 2 a.m., contemplating whether to walk in. Eventually, I thought, screw it, and got out of the car. I wasn't even sure if they'd let me in at this hour, but the nurse at the front desk was cool about it. She pointed me in the direction of Jess's room, and before I knew it, I was standing outside her door. I didn't go in right away. I stood there, staring at the door with my hand on the handle, trying to convince myself to walk through it. Part of me still wanted to turn around and leave, but I'd come this far, so I figured I might as well see it through. When I finally opened the door, Jess was lying in bed, hooked up to all these machines. She looked different, not just because of the accident or her illness, but something else. She looked tired, worn out, like the years had taken more from her than I'd realized. It was strange seeing her like this after all that time. She didn't notice me at first. She was staring out the window, lost in her own thoughts. When she finally saw me, her eyes widened in disbelief, as if she couldn't believe I actually showed up. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other in silence. I didn't know what to say, and I think she was too shocked to speak. Eventually, she broke the silence, saying, "I didn't think you'd come." Her voice was soft, like she was struggling to get the words out. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, well, here I am." Another long pause followed, and then Jess started to cry, not the dramatic, attention-seeking kind she used to do, but something different. This was quieter, more genuine. It caught me off guard because I honestly didn't expect her to have any real emotions left for me. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I know I don't deserve to ask for your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that." I stood there, not really knowing how to respond. What do you even say to that? I wasn't about to tell her everything was okay, because it wasn't. But I also wasn't there to tear her apart. "I don't know what you want me to say," I finally replied. "You broke my trust. You broke us. That's not something you can just apologize for and expect it to go away." Jess nodded, still crying. "I know," she whispered. "I know I hurt you. I was selfish and stupid, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I'm sorry for everything, for ruining what we had, for not being the person you deserved." Hearing her say that was strange. Part of me felt like I should be angry, but I wasn't. Maybe I'd been angry for so long that I just ran out of it. I was still hurt, still carrying that weight around, but the rage I used to feel wasn't there anymore. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how much time had passed and how much we'd both changed. In that moment, I realized something. Closure wasn't about her, it was about me. I had been holding on to this anger for years, thinking it was protecting me, but really it was just keeping me stuck in the past. Maybe seeing Jess like this, so vulnerable and broken, made me realize. "I don't hate you anymore," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "But I'm never going to forget what you did." Jess nodded again, tears still streaming down her face. "I wouldn't expect you to." And for the first time in a long time, we talked. I shared my side of the story, everything I'd felt when she betrayed me, how her actions had changed my life forever. She listened, really listened, without interrupting or making excuses. It was hard, but cathartic at the same time. I still didn't know if I could forgive her, but I realized that I didn't have to decide that right then. I just needed to let go of the anger that had been holding me back. So that's where we left it, no promises. Just an understanding that we had both made mistakes. I said my goodbyes and walked out of that room feeling lighter than I had in years. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step forward, and for now, that was enough.